July 22nd, 1988. No, that is the wrong year, the wrong city, the wrong daughter. Let me begin again. September 18th, 1982. A 17-year-old girl is alone in a hospital bed. There is a cervical collar around her neck. She cannot turn her head. The hospital she is in bears her mother's name. Her mother died in this hospital 4 days ago in a room not far from where the girl is now lying. A small television is bolted to the wall, the sound turned down low. On the screen, a funeral procession is moving through the streets of Monaco. Diana, Princess of Wales, is walking behind the coffin. Nancy Reagan is there, and Cary Grant and the Empress of Iran. Samuel Barber's Adagio for Strings is playing inside St. Nicholas Cathedral, 500 metres from this hospital bed. The girl cannot attend. She watches the funeral on a tiny screen. Across Europe, in newspapers she has not yet read, a rumour has already begun. The rumour is that she was driving the car. The rumour is that she killed her mother. Her name is Princess Stéphanie of Monaco. She is the youngest of 3 children. There is also a sister who, at 25, is about to spend the next 4 decades stepping forward every time someone in this family steps back. There is a brother who will spend the next 20 years failing to publicly claim 2 children he has fathered. And there is a father who will, this evening and for the next 23 years, sit in the palace above the cathedral and refuse in every meaningful way to move on. This is the story of Prince Rainier III and the 3 children Grace Kelly left behind. To understand what happened to those children, you have to understand what it cost their father to build the world they were born into. Rainier Louis-Henri Maxence Bertrand Grimaldi was born on the 31st of May 1923 in the Prince's Palace of Monaco. He was the first hereditary prince to be born on the rock since the 18th century. His parents were already by then a marriage in the early stages of failing. His mother, Princess Charlotte, was the illegitimate daughter of the future Louis II by a Montmartre cabaret singer. She had been legitimized by statute and adopted into the Grimaldi name as a political necessity, to keep the throne out of the hands of a German cousin whose succession would have triggered French intervention. His father, Count Pierre de Polignac, had renounced his own surname the day before the wedding so that his children could continue the dynasty. He was a friend of Marcel Proust and of Jean Cocteau. The marriage was not a love match. It was a constitutional manoeuvre. By the time Rainier was 9, the manoeuvre had collapsed. His parents separated, then divorced. The case was so bitter that Prince Louis II is reported to have threatened to call out the Monegasque army if Pierre ever set foot in the principality again. Life magazine, looking back from a distance of 15 years, summarised the rupture in a single sentence. The union, it wrote, ended under circumstances which prompted the temperamental father-in-law to vow he would call out the army if his son-in-law ever returned. The boy at the centre of the rupture was sent away. He went to Summerfield School in Hastings on the south coast of England. He was the only foreign child among 560 pupils. He was sneered at by his classmates as fat little Monaco. From there he went to Stowe in Buckinghamshire, which he loathed. From Stowe he was sent to La Rosie in Switzerland, where the Spectator columnist Taki Theodorakopoulos later remembered that even at the School of Kings, the small Monegasque boy was looked down on. He learned very young that the dynasty he had been born to defend was not enough on its own to make anyone love him. His older sister Antoinette did not love him either. By the early 1950s, she was conspiring with her lover to depose her own brother and install herself as regent for her infant son. Earlier, she had successfully sabotaged Rainier's 6-year relationship with the French actress Gisèle Pascal by spreading rumours that Pascal was infertile, rumours later disproved. His mother, Charlotte, had by then retired to a chateau in the French countryside, where she earned a degree in social work, became a prison visitor, and turned the estate into a halfway house for ex-convicts. Her live-in lover and chauffeur was the celebrated French jewel thief Rainier III. When asked by her stunned son how she could possibly justify the arrangement, she is reported to have said that after all those years in the shade, she thought a little son would do him good. She kept 7 small terriers. They bit visitors' heels. This is the family Rainier had when he met Grace Kelly. The meeting was arranged. In May of 1955, the editor of Paris Match, who happened to be married to the actress Olivia de Havilland, brokered a photo session at the Prince's Palace. Grace Kelly, then 25 and the most photographed actress in Hollywood, was leading the United States delegation to the Cannes Film Festival. She nearly left before Rainier arrived from his yacht. When he did arrive, he gave her a private tour of his small palace zoo, chimpanzees, a few big cats, the menagerie a 32-year-old prince had assembled, because as a child he had dreamed of running a circus. By the time the photographers' cameras were packed away, something had shifted. De Havilland later said she guessed things had gone wonderfully well by Grace's manner upon returning. She was, de Havilland said, in a state of enchantment. The engagement was announced 8 months later in Philadelphia. The wedding took place on the 18th and 19th of April 1956. The Kelly family, according to multiple biographers, paid a dowry of $2 million to the Grimaldis. Several biographers have written, citing palace sources who later denied it, that Grace was required to undergo a medical examination to certify her fertility, because under the Franco-Monegasque Treaty of 1918, the principality would revert to French protection if the Grimaldis failed to produce a legitimate heir. The wedding was televised by MGM to 30 million viewers. Grace gave up her career. Rainier reportedly forbade her films from being shown in Monaco. When Hitchcock offered her the lead in Marnie 6 years later, the public outcry from her own subjects was so hostile that the offer quietly died. Her bridesmaid, Judith Balaban Quine, a quarter of a century later, described what had happened in a single, careful sentence. He was her prince on a white charger, Quine wrote, and he was going to rescue her from all this. He could not possibly have known that what he was taking her from was what made her the very person he loved. She did not know it either. They had 3 children. The marriage, by every account that survives, contained both a real and durable affection and a slow-building sadness on Grace's side that she described to friends as living in a gilded cage. Some biographers, Wendy Lee, Robert Lacey, have written about affairs on both sides. Other biographers have disputed those claims. What is not disputed is that Grace, as a mother, did the work. She helped with homework in the afternoon. She put the children to bed. She insisted on Thanksgiving turkey, virtually unknown in France at the time. Her nicknames for them were lasting. Alba was Albie. Stéphanie was the enfant terrible. Caroline was simply Caroline. Rainier was the more distant figure. The children in adulthood would describe him with the same word: demanding. Albert, in 2023, told a Monaco interviewer that his father had been a little intimidating, demanding rather than harsh. Stéphanie, around the same time, said he could be severe, but that they had always known the limits not to be crossed, and that this had always been done with kindness. Both of them, asked who they ran to as small children, gave the same answer: their mother, or before her, the English nanny Maureen, whom they called King, and to whom Caroline, in adulthood, would credit her actual upbringing. When Maureen left for her annual leave each year, Caroline remembered, she and Albert would scream, "Don't go, don't go," and their mother would inevitably end up calling Maureen home early. This is the contradiction at the centre of Rainier's fatherhood. He loved his children. He also presided over a family in which the children were, from birth, public property. He had inherited a tiny throne whose continued existence was conditional on the children producing more children, and on those children doing so within the lines of a constitutional document drafted in 1918. He could not change this. He could not protect them from it. He could only watch. Caroline Louise Marguerite Grimaldi was born on the 23rd of January 1957, 10 months after the wedding. She weighed 8 pounds, 2 ounces. The cathedral bells rang. The cafes of Monte Carlo gave away free champagne. Crowds gathered in front of the palace and chanted, "Vive la princesse." Under the 1918 treaty, this small infant girl had just preserved Monaco's sovereignty. The pregnancy and the birth had been so intensely covered by the European press that the term paparazzi began to attach itself in those months to the photographers who pursued her parents. She was heir presumptive from the moment of her birth until her brother arrived 14 months later. She would be heir presumptive again in adulthood for the years between her father's death and the birth of her brother's twins. The pattern of her life, even before she could read, was already being set. She would be the one who stepped forward when the others stepped back. She was educated at the Convent of the Sacred Heart in Paris, then at St. Mary's School in Ascot, then briefly at Sciences Po, and then at the Sorbonne, where she took a diploma in philosophy with minors in psychology and biology. She spoke 5 languages. Decades later, in an interview with Madame Figaro, she remembered 2 moments from those years. The first was her mother saying, in good faith, that she did not need to go to school. The second was a university professor who told her, with what she described as incredible cruelty, that she was taking the place of a deserving student. Both moments, in different directions, told her the same thing. The world had decided who she was before she had decided for herself. Her childhood was over by the time she was 21. By then she had married a Parisian banker named Philippe Junot. He was 17 years older than she was. He was, by every account, a playboy. Her mother had pleaded with her not to marry him. Grace had taken Caroline on a trip to the Galapagos, hoping that the distance from Junot would break the spell. It did not. Grace, in despair, telephoned her sister Lisanne back in America. "What do you do?" Grace asked, "when you know your child is headed for disaster and you can't stop it from happening?" Her sister told her there was nothing to do. You let her get hurt. There is no other way. The wedding was held at the palace on the 28th and 29th of June, 1978. 600 guests attended, including Frank Sinatra, Cary Grant, and Gregory Peck. The honeymoon was a public catastrophe. Junot reportedly invited a photographer friend along and sold the images. Caroline, by her own later admission to the biographer Geoffrey Robinson, said she had started to wake up and wonder what she had done while they were still on their honeymoon. The civil divorce came through in October of 1980. The Vatican annulled the marriage 12 years later. There were no children. She married for the second time on the 29th of December, 1983. The groom was an Italian industrialist named Stefano Casiraghi. He was 23 years old. She was 26 and roughly 3 months pregnant. The ceremony, civil only because the Vatican annulment had not yet been granted, lasted 15 minutes. There were perhaps 20 guests in the Hall of Mirrors. Stefano, by every account from those who knew him, was the opposite of Junot. A friend later remembered that whenever the rest of the family were having their picture taken, Stefano would step back. He never forced himself into that world. 3 children arrived in 3 years. Andrea in June of 1984, Charlotte in August of 1986, Pierre in September of 1987. Caroline retreated with them into the kind of private life her own childhood had never permitted. They lived between Monaco and a country house. Photographers were kept further away. Stefano raced powerboats. By 1989, he was world offshore powerboat champion. He had told Caroline by the autumn of 1990 that he intended to retire after one final race. That race was held on the 3rd of October 1990 off Saint-Jean-Cap-Ferrat, a few miles from the Monaco harbour. His boat was a 42-foot red and white catamaran called Pinot di Pinot. There was no full canopy. At 11:18 in the morning, a wave destabilised the hull. A second, larger wave flipped it. At 93 miles an hour, his co-pilot was thrown clear with severe injuries. Stefano, strapped into his seat, took the full impact when the hull slammed back down onto the water. A French rival watching from another boat said later that he certainly didn't have time to see what was coming, and that at that speed remaining trapped under the boat must have meant he was killed instantly. Caroline was in Paris when the news reached her. She flew to Monaco that afternoon already dressed in black. The funeral was held at St. Nicholas Cathedral in the same place where her mother had been buried 8 years earlier. Andrea was 6. Charlotte was 4. Pierre had just turned 3. Caroline has, in the 3.5 decades since, never given a public interview about her second husband's death. The silence is itself the testimony. She withdrew after Stefano to a rented house in Saint-Rémy-de-Provence. The children attended local schools. They were given no royal titles. She was trying by every available means to make them ordinary. 6 years later, in the summer of 1996, the Italian magazine Oggi published photographs of her looking gaunt and bald. She had developed alopecia. For more than a year, she wore silk turbans. Then she shaved her head entirely. Her brother Albert, asked about it by People magazine, said it was a skin problem, a dermatology thing, and that her hair would grow back. It did, eventually. The doctors quoted in the press attributed the alopecia to severe stress. The stress was Stefano. It was also by then Ernst August. She married Ernst August, the 5th of Hanover, on the 23rd of January 1999, her 42nd birthday. They had a daughter, Alexandra, 6 months later. The marriage has been, from almost the first year, troubled. Ernst August has been involved in a series of legal and physical incidents, assaults, an episode at a World's Fair in 2000, periods of public hospitalisation. They have lived separately for years. They have never divorced. Caroline is now, as of 2026, the longest-serving member of the Monegasque royal family. From her mother's death in 1982 until her brother's marriage in 2011, she was the de facto First Lady of Monaco. She still stands in for him at state functions when needed. She founded the Princess Grace Ballet de Monte Carlo to keep her mother's memory in motion. Asked once about how she thinks of her mother, she said she liked to think that tradition is the transmission of fire and not the worshipping of ashes. In October of 2025, the French Republic awarded her the Grand Cross of the National Order of Merit. She is 69 years old. She has buried 2 husbands and her mother. She has raised 4 children of her own. She has spent her entire life being the daughter who keeps the doors of the palace open, while everyone else in turn has fallen behind them. If Caroline's story is one of the women and men she has had to bury, the story of her younger brother is one of the children he could not, for years, name aloud. Albert Alexandre Louis Pierre Grimaldi was born on the 14th of March 1958 at 10:50 in the morning. The Principality erupted. 101 cannon shots were fired from Fort Antoine. Bells rang. Cafes gave away champagne. He was, the moment he drew breath, the Principality's insurance policy. The boy who guaranteed that the throne, if all the dynastic arithmetic worked out, would pass cleanly to a Grimaldi son. His godparents were chosen with characteristic Grace Kelly seriousness. Prince Louis de Polignac, his father's cousin, and the exiled Queen Victoria Eugenie of Spain. The choice of an exiled queen over 40 other available Catholic royals was not an accident. Grace had always paid attention to the people the world had stopped paying attention to. His childhood was, by the standards of his sisters, almost normal. He was a quiet boy, athletic and polite. He spent 6 summers at Camp Tecumseh on Lake Winnipesaukee in New Hampshire, first as a camper and then as a counselor. He was educated at the Lycée Albert Premier in Monaco-Ville, then at Amherst College in Massachusetts between 1977 and 1981. At Amherst, he enrolled simply as Albert Grimaldi. He joined the Chi Psi fraternity. He worked in the art library. He sang in the Glee Club, which toured Europe and the Middle East in 1979. He studied political science, economics, anthropology, philosophy, German, and music. He graduated in May of 1981. His mother, his father, and his older sister flew over to attend the ceremony. It was one of the last public appearances Grace made on American soil with all 3 children. 16 months later, she was dead. What followed in Albert's life was 25 years of being the most discussed eligible bachelor in Europe. He dated, or was reported to have dated, a list of women that read like a chronicle of late 20th century celebrity: Brooke Shields, Catherine Oxenberg, Mary Waite, Claudia Schiffer, Naomi Campbell, Kylie Minogue. He competed in 5 consecutive Winter Olympic Games as a bobsledder, under his own name, without his title. He was the Olympic flag bearer for Monaco 3 times. He became a member of the International Olympic Committee in 1985. He travelled to the North Pole by dog sled in 2006 and to the South Pole on foot in 2009. He founded an environmental foundation that bears his name. He was, in every public sense, doing the things a prince was supposed to do. In private, he was failing to do one of them. In March of 1992, in Palm Springs, California, a real estate agent named Tamara Rotolo gave birth to a daughter. The girl was named Jasmine Grace Grimaldi. Her father was Albert. He had met Tamara on the Côte d'Azur the previous summer. He did not, in the years that followed, publicly acknowledge his daughter. Tamara filed a paternity suit in California. It was dismissed on jurisdictional grounds. Yasmin first met her father at the age of 11 on a quiet visit to Monaco in 2003. He officially confirmed paternity in May of 2006 after a DNA test. By then she was 14 years old. In August of 2003 in Paris, a former Air France flight attendant from Togo named Nicole Coste gave birth to a son. The boy's father was Albert. They had met on a flight from Paris to Nice 6 years earlier. Nicole had lived in Albert's Paris apartment, presented to the world as the girlfriend of one of his friends, receiving an allowance from him. Albert had told her before his father's death in April of 2005 that he would register paternity once he was sovereign prince. He did not. In May of 2005, Nicole Coste went to Paris Match. The magazine put the story on the cover with photographs of Albert holding and feeding his son. He confirmed paternity formally on the 6th of July 2005, 6 days before his enthronement. The boy's name is Alexandre Grimaldi Coste. Decades later, asked by a French magazine whether the word illegitimate accurately described him, Alexandre answered that using such a word was insulting. His father, he said, was called Grimaldi. It made sense that he bear the name. Neither child can inherit the throne. Article 10 of the Monegasque Constitution, as amended in 2002 by Albert's father, requires direct and legitimate descent. Rainier's amendment was framed publicly as a modernisation. It was, in the right light, also a confession. By extending the line of succession to siblings and their descendants, Rainier was acknowledging, on the public record in legislative form, what he could no longer pretend not to know. His son might never have a legitimate heir of his own. In 2010, Albert's life finally turned. He had met a South African Olympic swimmer named Charlene Whitstock at a swimming meet in Monaco a decade earlier. They were engaged in June of that year. The wedding was held on the 1st and 2nd of July 2011. Her gown was Giorgio Armani Privé, 2,500 hours of work, 40,000 Swarovski crystals, 20,000 mother-of-pearl teardrops. The bridesmaids' dresses were designed by Caroline. The world watched. In the days immediately following the wedding, the French press began publishing reports, sourced to figures inside the Principality, that Charlene had attempted to flee Monaco 3 separate times in the weeks before the ceremony. Once to the South African embassy in Paris, where she had reportedly taken refuge before her passport was confiscated. Once during the Monaco Grand Prix in late May. Once in a helicopter en route to Nice airport, where her passport was again said to have been taken. The reported reason in each case was the same: fresh rumours of yet another illegitimate child. The palace denied the flight attempts categorically. Charlene was visibly tearful at every public moment of the wedding. She wept at the altar. She wept at Saint-Devote afterwards. She later told the Times that everything had been so overwhelming and that the tension had built and built and that she had burst into tears. And that then she had burst into tears some more because she was thinking that the whole world had seen her cry. Their twins were born on the 10th of December 2014. Princess Gabriella came first. Prince Jacques came 2 minutes later. Under male preference primogeniture, Jacques is the heir. In 2021, Charlene travelled to South Africa for an anti-poaching trip and a funeral. A dental procedure she had undergone earlier developed into a severe infection of her sinuses and inner ear. Her doctors forbade her from flying. She remained in South Africa for the next 10 months. She missed the twins' 7th birthday. She missed her 10th wedding anniversary. She missed Monaco's National Day, on which her 2 children stood on the palace balcony with handmade signs reading, in the largest letters their hands could form, "We miss you, Mommy, and we love you, Mommy." She returned to Monaco in November of that year and was admitted at her own request to a treatment facility outside the country for what the palace described as exhaustion, both emotional and physical. She came back to the palace in March of 2022. In April of 2025, Albert quietly observed the 20th anniversary of his accession with a single photograph released by the palace captioned in memory of Prince Rainier III. Asked around that time what had changed him most as a man, he answered that becoming a father had. He did not specify which fatherhood he meant. He has fathered by now 4 acknowledged children. The order of acknowledgement has not, in any of the 4 cases, matched the order of birth. But if Caroline lost the husbands and Albert lost the years, the youngest child lost something neither of them lost, and she lost it in a single morning on a road above the sea. Stéphanie Marie Elizabeth Grimaldi was born on the 1st of February 1965. She was the last child. Grace had suffered 2 miscarriages between Albert and Stéphanie. There would not be another pregnancy. She arrived into a marriage that had by then been operating for almost 9 years, into a household that had developed its own choreography, into an older brother and an older sister whose lives were already shaped to the contours of the throne. Her mother, who had run out of polite names, called her the enfant terrible. 6 nannies left the family in a single year, defeated by her. Rock Agile, the family's farm above La Turbie, in the hills behind Monaco, was where she was happiest. The farm was rough and informal. There were chimpanzees and big cats, Rainier's private menagerie. There was a vegetable garden and a small art studio where Grace painted. There were horses. The children dressed casually. Stéphanie, even at 6 and 7, was the one most often photographed in trousers, on a bicycle, with a dog. By her teens, she had begun to dye her hair. She wore the androgynous, unsettling, athletic style she would never entirely abandon. She had, by the autumn of 1982, completed her baccalaureate literary in Neuilly-sur-Seine. She was 17 years old. On the morning of the 13th of September 1982, she was due to drive down to Monaco Ville with her mother, then catch a train to Paris that afternoon. The next day, she was supposed to begin a Christian Dior internship. The car was a 1971 metallic green Rover P6. It was 11 years old. The back seat was packed with dresses on hangers and hat boxes, leaving no room for the chauffeur. The chauffeur had offered to make a second trip. Grace had told him not to bother. She would drive herself. Stéphanie sat in the passenger seat. Neither of them put on a seatbelt. The road they took down from Roc Agol, the D37, runs along the Moyenne Corniche above Monaco. It is the same road on which Hitchcock had filmed To Catch a Thief in 1955, with Grace Kelly in the passenger seat. 27 years later, on the same descent, Grace was the driver. Approximately 2 miles from the village of La Turbie, the road bends through a hairpin of nearly 150 degrees. A truck driver behind them later told the police that he had blown his horn. The car, he said, seemed to pull back into control. But then, he said, he realised it was picking up speed, going faster and faster toward a hairpin bend a couple of 100 yards in front. The brake lights, he said, never came on. The Rover went over the edge. It dropped roughly 120 feet, 37 metres, into the market garden of a man named Sesto Lecquio. It cartwheeled through trees. It came to rest on its roof. There were no skid marks on the road above. Stéphanie, in the seat beside her mother, was not trapped. The passenger door had been crushed by the impact against the slope. She climbed out instead through the driver's side door. This single physical fact, the side of the car she emerged from, would become the foundation of the rumour that pursued her for the next 40 years. The rumour was that Stéphanie had been driving. The rumour was that she had killed her mother. She was 17. She did not yet have a driving licence. The truck driver who had been directly behind the car had seen Grace at the wheel. None of that mattered. The hospital in Monaco at that time had no on-site CT scanner. Grace was treated initially for what her doctors believed were her primary injuries: broken ribs, a broken thigh, a broken collarbone, a head wound. By the time she was scanned at a private clinic later that evening, the doctors found 2 distinct cerebral hemorrhages in her brain. Only one of them was consistent with the impact. The other was small and older, a hemorrhage that had almost certainly preceded the crash. The medical consensus, then and now, is that Grace Kelly suffered a mild stroke at the wheel of the Rover, lost control, and could not recover. Stéphanie, in the passenger seat, was begging her to brake. Stéphanie, in her own account given to her sister later that day and recorded by Jeffrey Robinson, said her mother kept saying, "I can't stop. The brakes don't work. I can't stop." The hospital was named after her mother. Her mother died in it the following evening. Stéphanie, with a hairline fracture of her cervical vertebra and concussion and broken ribs and broken teeth and what she would later describe as 8 months of subsequent rehabilitation, was kept in a different ward. She learned that her mother was dead on the 16th of September. 2 days after that, on the 18th, the funeral was held at St. Nicholas Cathedral. She was not allowed to attend. She watched it on television in a cervical collar in the polyclinic that bore her mother's name. The Princess of Wales walked behind her mother's coffin. Adagio for strings played in the cathedral 500 metres away. There was an empty seat in the family pew where she should have been. What followed in her life was 20 years of behaviour the European press read as scandal, and the family understood, eventually, as grief. She apprenticed at Christian Dior. She dyed her hair red, then green. She moved to Los Angeles for a period with a twice-divorced nightclub owner. She launched a swimwear line called Pool Position. the inaugural fashion show of which ended with Stéphanie and her business partner diving fully clothed into the pool to the sound of Just a Gigolo. In 1986, at the age of 21, she released a pop single called Ouragan. In English, it was called Irresistible. It went to #1 on the French charts and stayed there for 10 consecutive weeks. The album that followed was certified gold and sold roughly 1.5 million copies worldwide. In 1991, she was credited under the pseudonym Mystery Girl as a lyricist on Michael Jackson's In the Closet. She fell in love with one of her bodyguards. His name was Daniel Ducrouet. He was a former pet shop clerk and fish wholesaler who had joined the Palace Security Service in 1988. They had 2 children together, both born out of wedlock. Louis in November of 1992, Pauline in May of 1994. They married civilly only on the 1st of July 1995 at Monaco's Town Hall. In August of 1996, 2 photographers, one of Fiera, whom had been paid somewhere between $100,000 and $200,000, produced explicit photographs of Daniel Ducrouet at a private villa near Cap Ferrat with a Belgian model who had won a competition called Miss Naked Breast the previous year. The Italian magazine Eva Tremila put the photographs on its stands on the 27th of August. The French daily François ran the story across its front page under the headline Apocalypse Monaco. The day Stéphanie left her marital home was the same day Charles and Diana's divorce was finalised. She filed for divorce on the 16th of September. It was granted on the 4th of October. If you watched our video on the Shah of Iran's 4 children, you already know the shape of what tabloid attention can do to a child of the throne. It found Layla Pahlavi in a London hotel room in 2001 after years of her slow disappearance from public life. The contrast with Stéphanie is the difference of an inch. Stéphanie survived the same level of exposure. She survived it by becoming, for 2 decades, someone her own family could not always recognise. And that too, in its way, is a kind of survival. She had a 3rd child, a daughter, in July of 1998. The girl was named Camille Marie Kelly Gottlieb. The middle name was for Grace. The surname was for the man widely understood to be Camille's father, the head of Stéphanie's security detail, a former Paris gendarme named Jean-Raymond Gottlieb. Stéphanie left the line for the father's name blank on the birth certificate. Camille bears her mother's lover's surname rather than the Grimaldi name. She is not in the line of succession. In late 2001, Stéphanie did the thing that, even in the long catalogue of European royal eccentricity, has no precedent. She left the palace, she moved into the caravan of an elephant trainer. The elephant trainer's name was Franco Knie. He was a 6th-generation circus performer with the Nice-Swiss National Circus. They had met at the Monte Carlo International Circus Festival, the festival her father had founded a quarter of a century earlier. Stéphanie travelled with the circus through Switzerland for several months with her 3 children, Louis, who was 9, Pauline, who was 7, Camille, who was 3. The children attended school in Zurich. She was photographed on the steps of the trailer in a tracksuit, smoking. Knie was already married. His wife and son were waiting for him at home. The relationship ended after a ski holiday in March of 2002. She married, in 2003, a Portuguese acrobat from the same circus. He was 10 years younger than she was. The wedding took place in a town near Geneva. Neither of their families attended. The marriage lasted approximately 14 months. They divorced in November of 2004. In October of 2002, in the issue of Paris Match that contained her longest ever interview, Stéphanie addressed, for the first time, the rumour. The only real witness to the accident, she said, saw that her mother was at the wheel. She was not driving. She had had enough, she said, of people saying she had killed her mother. Then she went further. She said that what she had been told to do at 17 was the impossible thing. She had been thrown around inside the car, she said, just as her mother had been catapulted into the back seat. She had been about to take her driving test. She had known you were supposed to put it in park. She had pulled on the handbrake. Nothing had worked. The brakes, she said, had not been failing. Her mother had perhaps confused the pedals. She did not know she had been 17. And then she said the sentence that, in any honest reading of the last 40 years of this family, is the entire ledger. Unless, she said, perhaps the fact that I am still here and that it was I who survived. In the years since, she has stopped marrying. She lives now in a villa in Monaco Ville called Clos Saint-Martin, next door to her sister Caroline's villa. Her daughter Camille still lives with her. Her 2 older children have married and given her 2 granddaughters. Her son Louis works in administration for the Monaco Football Club. Her daughter Pauline has, in 2026, just relaunched her mother's pool position swimwear line. Camille founded, at the age of 19, an anti-drunk driving charity in Monaco called B, Safe Monaco. She launched it after losing a friend to a drunk driver. The cause she chose, in any honest reading of this family's history, sits squarely on the road above La Turbie. Stéphanie has spent the last 20 years quietly working on what came to define her. Fight AIDS Monaco, the foundation she founded in 2004. The United Nations Goodwill Ambassador role she has held since 2006. The respite home for people living with HIV that she opened in Carpentras in 2010. In October of 2025, the French Republic made her an officer of the Legion of Honor. The Grand Cross had gone to her sister. The youngest child, who was once thought to be ungovernable, has turned out to be the one who governs herself most. She is 61 years old. She has carried for 43 years the question of whether she should still be alive. She has answered it, finally, not with words, but with a daughter who tries to keep other people from dying on roads. 3 children, 3 marriages each, or, in Albert's case, 3 categories of family. The wife, the daughter from California, the son from Paris. 2 husbands were buried before they had grown old. 1 mother was buried before she had grown old. 1 father who never remarried, who continued to live in the same palace where his wife had died, who chain-smoked the 60 cigarettes a day that would 23 years later take him to the same cathedral where she had been buried. Every member of this family has buried someone they loved at St. Nicholas Cathedral, in the same 6 city blocks where they were born. The pattern is not tragedy as fate. It is something more precise than that. It is visible as a solvent, a famous name that dissolves, slowly, the private life it was supposed to protect. There is a photograph from the summer of 1981 taken by the family's longtime photographer, Howell Conant. All 5 Grimaldis are in it. Rainier, 58, Grace, 51, Caroline, 24, between her 2 marriages, Albert, 23, just graduated from Amherst, Stéphanie, 16, with her bright, unsettled eyes. They are smiling. Conant was packing his equipment for the next Christmas card session when Grace died, the following September. We know now what was about to happen to each of the 5 faces in that photograph. We know what had already happened to one of them. The small, undiagnosed cerebral aneurysm in her brain waiting. Looking at the photograph today is like looking at a candle a moment before it is blown out. None of them in that frame knows. Only the camera, in retrospect, knows. Prince Rainier III turned a tax haven into a fairy tale. He married, for that purpose, the most beautiful woman in America, and he loved her until she was put in the ground 26 years later, and he loved her for the 23 years after that, until he was placed in the same ground beside her. But the story of what happened to his 3 children is not a fairy tale. It is something else. It is the story of what happens when a parent, however much they love their children, cannot give them the one thing the world will not let them have. A name that is just a name. A face that is just a face. An ordinary morning on an ordinary road in an ordinary car. A life in which the camera is not always on. Caroline learned to keep the doors of the palace open while the people behind them died. Albert learned eventually to claim the children he had failed for years to publicly call his own. Stéphanie learned that surviving and being forgiven are not the same thing. They learned, all three of them, that being born into a name is not the same as being given a life. They learned that the throne their father defended with everything he had was the same throne that took, slowly and without apology, the privacy in which a family heals. And on a morning in mid-April of 2005, the funeral cortege for Prince Rainier III moved through the streets of Monaco toward the cathedral where he had married Grace Kelly 49 years earlier and where he had buried her 23 years earlier. Caroline walked behind the coffin in a black lace mantilla. Stéphanie walked beside her in another. Albert led them, and limping behind the three of them on stiff old legs was Rainier's 6-year-old dog, a small cream and grey animal named Odin. The dog had refused the night his master died to leave the bedroom door. He refused this morning to be left out of the cortege. He walked the route his master could not walk. He finished a journey he had never asked to begin. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more stories like this.